Hi, my name is Bruno. I'm consultant in project and program management focusing on IT and organizational change. I've always had a lot of interest for how to measure project performance beyond the three traditional constraints of scope, cost, and time. Indeed, like many other professionals, I have noticed that these three dimensions are seldom good enough to lead to success. I like to first explore the basic concepts of product performance measurement and then apply these concepts to a simple example with you. Before going further, we need to ask ourselves why it is actually important to measure performance in projects. To put it very simply, what gets measured gets done. Or in other words, if we can't measure something, we can't manage it. We don't know where we stand. We don't know how to make the right decisions. Which brings us to the second point. The main enabler for effective decision making is an effective project performance measurement system. To have effective decision making, we need to provide the right information to the right people at the right time. If we look around the project at 360 degrees, we notice that there will be many stakeholders with different needs, and not just, for example, the customer or sponsor. These different stakeholders will need different metrics to make the proper decisions in their areas of responsibility. The third point is important and very often overlooked. Indeed, decision making itself is essentially a reactive process. We provide information to different stakeholders, and based on this information, they will make decisions and they will make actions. They will take actions. But there is a whole proactive aspect to performance measurement. Indeed, if we have good metrics, well aligned with the objectives and well communicated, different stakeholders, including project manager and the delivery teams, will naturally adjust their behavior, consciously or unconsciously, so that the indicators are better off. So it's proactively shaping people's behavior. And the fourth point, good, effective performance management system will reduce administrative effort. This is a bit counterintuitive because when we talk about setting up some new metrics, for example, the first reaction is that it will generate additional tasks. We have to collect these metrics, we have to publish them, we have to interpret them, maybe discuss them. So is it really worthwhile? But if the system was well designed, it's extremely worthwhile, extremely efficient. Indeed, many projects suffer from what we often call overcommunication. Well, overcommunication is not necessarily evil. Overcommunication means that because we don't exactly know who needs what, we send all information to all stakeholders. Okay? This is the extreme of overcommunication. And then they have to dig into it and get what is relevant to them. Because it's somewhere in there, probably. Maybe not, actually. Okay? So, one of the reasons to be for a good performance measurement system is also to improve project management efficiency and decision making effectiveness. A side point to this, number 4, is that a good system allows to place the control at the most appropriate level. Indeed, if the metrics are properly designed, they will state the what, and the stakeholders will know where to go. It's like a beacon. Uh, on the other hand, they have the freedom in their respective fields, meaning that they are subject matter experts. The metrics shouldn't tell them how to achieve the results, but should tell them what is the expected result. So it allows to have teams that are more autonomous, reduce close supervision, reduce what we often call micromanagement by defining at the right level what are the objectives, what is the what, and what is the how, and leave that to the best people. The way to set up a product performance management system is essentially a top-down process. We start by defining success. How do we define success? First, we look at the project objectives and we identify the stakeholders because they are the ones who will define success actually. We go and see the stakeholder, which is usually a project manager's responsibility. Go and see the stakeholders and ask them, Mr. Stakeholder, what are your expectations for this project? How would you say you would define whether this project is success or failure? Based on these kind of questions, and there are a number of techniques to elicit proper and constructive answers, the stakeholders will mention a number of objectives and sometimes constraints. Typical objectives would be, for example, profitability, return on investment, commercialization, or what types of features the solution would include. And typical constraints could include, for example, time, cost, or compliance to some standards. These objectives and constraints together make up what we call the critical success factors. They are actually a high-level view of what success is for different stakeholders. Now, you certainly guessed that there will be many constraints, and usually not just time and cost. And these constraints are sometimes in conflict, which means that we might have to make decisions that will make one critical success factor look better and another one look worse. In other words, it might make one stakeholder better off and other stakeholders worse off. This is called trade-off decision making. And in many situations, indeed, we don't have a win-win situation. A proper performance measurement system will allow this trade-off decision making, which is a potentially conflictual activity, as smooth as possible, based on objective criteria. So, in the next slide, okay, you certainly realize by now that success is subjective. Indeed, it is defined by stakeholders, and the more complex the project is from an organizational point of view, the more different the expectations will be, and there will be different definitions of success. One of the roles of the project manager is to make sure these different definitions of success are supported by critical success factors and metrics that will make the decision process as smooth as possible during the project. A few words about politics. Politics is a necessity. Why? Because there will always be more than one definition of success and we'll never have completely perfect information. So there will always be a small part of discussion. However, me, like many others, often complain about excessive politics in projects. It means that usually a number of stakeholders will influence project by using authority or power or negotiation or whatever it is that might yield a result that is not the best possible result for the organization. This is a symptom of poor project performance management. Indeed, it means that a lot of things are left for discussion, whereas they should be objective metric to support decisions. So a lot of politics, what we call politics, should and could be avoided in project if we had a good project performance management system. Now, this slide shows a pyramid. You remember that a few minutes ago I mentioned that the process for establishing a system for measuring performance of projects is a top-down process. Well, we have to make sure that this top-down process actually reaches the ground, which is why it's a pyramid. First, we define success, and success is defined essentially by the critical success factors. However, these are not usually measurable directly. They're an intermediate step between the objectives and what is actually measurable, the KPIs. KPIs are the highest possible level metrics. They are really measurable. They are typically a combination of metrics associated with a target. This target might be dollar amount, time, date, point, features, whatever it is. In any case, it's measurable and it's associated with a target that will usually create a kind of score like excellent, good, average, poor, and so on. Well, so you notice that the critical success factors are converted. They are supported by KPIs. And the KPIs themselves are supported by potentially lower-level metrics and data. And this last layer is very important because one of the typical pitfalls when you define a product performance measurement system is that the KPIs are too high a level and there is little to connect them with the reality. Ideally, it should be streamlined. The basic metrics should be collected easily and produce the KPIs almost automatically. Which brings us to the next slide, a very important one, maybe the most important one of this whole 12 slides presentation. How to select good KPIs. Some professionals and authors can list up to 12 criteria. Well, I try to reduce them to 5. Actually, 4 real criteria and one, the fifth one, actionable, is actually a consequence of the fourth first. The first 4 ones. Indeed, if the 4 are true, then it's actionable too. First criteria is measurable. That's obvious. If you can't measure it, you can't do much with it. However, I have to mention that it doesn't have to be measurable scientifically. It just has to be precise enough for decision making. Just remember that. The goal is not to make mathematics here, okay? It is to make decisions. Second, predictive. If it's measurable, usually it can be used to forecast because we can extrapolate its value. For example, within time, 1 month from now, 2 months from now, 6 months from now, or at project completion, for example. Third criteria, relevant. Each critical success factor is supported by one or more KPI, and each KPI supports one or more critical success factor. This way, we make sure that all definitions of success of all stakeholders are actually supported by real metrics, and we don't measure anything we don't have to measure. The fourth criteria, easy to collect. That seems obvious, but it's not. There are 2 pitfalls to avoid. The first one is to use as KPIs only what is very visible and easiest to collect compared to the rest, which is one of the reasons time and cost are so popular. Yes, they are important metrics, but one of the reasons they are so widely used is also because compared to most others also very important metrics, they are comparatively easier to calculate. And the other extreme is just that we choose as KPIs something that is reflecting something wonderful made of many different metrics collected in different teams by different people at different time, and it's great on paper. Unfortunately, it's so hard to collect, so costly to collect that it's just not worthwhile. So we have to make sure that our feet touch the ground here and that we can collect these metrics efficiently. One of the ways to collect them efficiently is to have, for example, a project management office that will provide organizational assets to automatically calculate some of the raw metrics or raw data on which KPIs are based, because KPIs might differ from project to project. However, the underlying metrics and data will often be the same in every project. A simple timesheet application, for example, that's a very good example. It provides a lot of raw data that will be used in different KPIs. Now it's time to briefly look at an example. We'll apply these few concepts to a very simple example. We'll identify the stakeholders, then establish the critical success factors and the KPIs that support them. The project is a software project, essentially, that has to deliver an electronic commerce solution to increase sales. And there is a secondary objective, which is to make sure that the team can also support and build upon the product after delivery. I will make my image disappear so that you can see the diagram more clearly. Okay, this way. So here we show 5 groups of stakeholders: user, customer, delivery managers, team members, and the conformance bodies. So you notice that we did our homework properly. We looked all around the projects and identified all kinds of stakeholders, not just customer or sponsor, for example. Many stakeholders are there, and each of them has at least one critical success factor. So we notice that the critical success factors are very diversified, and we can imagine in the future that there might be some kind of conflictual situations between these groups of stakeholders. I encourage you to come back to this slide later after presentation to read it in more details. I wouldn't want to read the slide aloud now. Let's go to the next slide. So here, to the left of this slide, we have the different critical success factors that are mentioned in the previous slide for the different groups of stakeholders. And for each of them, we have 1, 2, or 3 KPIs to support them. We notice that the KPIs are indeed measurable. Again, Feel free to come back to this slide by yourself later to look in more detail. I chose 5 KPIs to detail them a little bit. I avoided especially the KPIs that are typical, like cost and time and scope, because I want to emphasize particularly what is beyond these 3 dimensions, particularly value, form of quality, incremental value delivery. All these elements are not typical, and often they are project specific, so they are more difficult to define. Well, there are a few things that should be discussed in this slide. The owner. Why is there an owner for a KPI? Why is it not just the project manager who is the owner of the KPI? Actually, it's a common mistake to have the project manager determine by himself or by herself the KPIs and how to measure them. The project manager will typically help and collaborate with the stakeholders to define the KPIs. The KPIs have to be chosen by the stakeholders who are interested in them, and the way to measure them, the measurement method, has to be agreed upon in collaboration with the stakeholders. Indeed, we want to make sure that the stakeholders are accountable for the KPIs. For example, what might happen if it's not the case? What might happen if I would choose the KPIs and the way to measure them by myself at the beginning of the project, and maybe later on there is a potential conflict about the status of the project? The stakeholders would just react by saying, hey, but Bruno, these KPIs, you decide them by themselves. They look good, but actually we don't know what they calculate. We don't know how they calculate it. So by doing that, I will be the one responsible for how to measure performance, which is not right. The different stakeholders have to take responsibility of how to define success for themselves. The project manager is there as a facilitator for this and to collect information and to publish them properly. It's very different. The measurement method, as I said earlier, is as simple as possible to enable decision making. No need to go in too much detail and to calculate things with 10 digits. It is usually useless, okay? We need just enough information to make decisions, which is also why we have targets, because usually scores like excellent, good, poor, critical, and so on are good enough for decision making. If we need more, we might drill down into the supporting metrics. But the KPIs, by definition, as a decision-making tool, have to be simple. Okay, we have reached the end of this short presentation. I will show my little face again there. There I am. I hope it was useful to you. For me, actually, it's a subject that is very interesting, and I'm passionate about this kind of topic and about project management in general. So if you want to discuss something with me, whether it's about your needs or just to share experience, feel free, comment on the video, contact me. In any case, I hope to hear from some of you, and I wish you good luck for your projects. Bye-bye.